And we went up and only half the boat cleared the rapids. We had whirlpools on one side, whitewater crashing, and we were stuck there with the other half. We were gradually edging back towards this whirlpool.
That was the voice of 29-year-old Suffolk-based explorer and speaker Lucy Shepherd, who's my guest on this week's episode of the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name's Dr. Will Duffin. I'm an expedition medic and WEM medical director. Lucy's just returned from a world-first trek across 250 miles of virgin rainforest in Guyana's Kanaku Mountains. And in this conversation, we talk about what motivates Lucy, how to thrive in the jungle, including campcraft and navigation skills. She reflects on dramatic run-ins with savage river rapids, bushmaster snakes, packs of wild pigs, and coordinating a jungle medevac, as well as how to adjust to life back home afterwards. I really enjoyed chatting to Lucy. Believe me, she is the real deal. I hope you enjoy listening too. Hey Lucy, I'm so glad you could join us on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
We're recording this in the middle of Storm Eunice, and I can see roof tiles flying off in front of me in the window. How are you surviving there in North London?
Yeah, I'm looking out at Ali Pali, Alexandra Palace Park. It's a little bit breezy. I don't think it's quite living up to what I'm expecting yet, but I'm ready for it. I'm going to hide in my flat until until it gets pretty gnarly.
You strike me as the kind of person that's pretty much ready for anything.
I think that's I think you have to be in order to do what I do, I suppose, or at least embrace the anything when it comes along.
And you know our pal Mark Beaumont, round the world cyclist, who's spoken at our conference a few times. How do you, Mark? How are you acquainted?
Yeah, so we know each other from the Scientific Exploration Society. We met a few times, but I think recently we spent a good evening together, and he's a great guy.
So to this episode, we're going to focus on this incredible trek you've done through Guyana's Kanaku Mountains. That was a 50-day trek accompanied by Amerindian tribesmen who you affectionately named your forest family. And Lucy's going to be speaking at our conference. So this is really a sneak peek of what you can expect. So Lucy, let's focus. You just got back, didn't you, 2.5 months ago from spending 50 days hiking across uncharted territory in the Amazon. Absolutely incredible feat. Let's start by just telling us why. Why did you choose this particular part of the world and this particular trip?
So this trip actually has quite a lot of history behind it. I first went to the Guyanese jungle in 2014. I actually had quite a scary encounter with a jaguar at that point. So it put me off for a little few years. But in 2020, I went back to Guyana to sort of face my fears of this area, and I went to the Kanaku Mountains to cross it from south to north. It was a much shorter journey. It was a journey that only took a couple of weeks, but it was very clear that there was so much left to explore from that. And the expedition that I've just come back from was a mammoth, out of this world. Sort of, it was bigger than anything I'd ever done. I mean, a lot of people thought we couldn't even do it. It is an area that is not very much researched. The maps that we were using 50 years old. So there really wasn't much information about it. And so that kind of attracted me to it, I suppose.
And what was so unique about your trip, Lucy, and this is very different to most expeditions that are organised, is rather than it being a large group of Westerners surrounded by all this kind of Gucci Western kit, supported by kind of the hardy locals, you chose to go alone. You told your boyfriend, no, you're not coming with me. You didn't bring anyone with you. It was just you surrounded by the Amerindian tribesmen. Why was it you chose to do that?
Well, these Amerindians, they're not strangers. They're friends of mine. I've been on previous expeditions. They're a hell of a guys. They're actually absolutely the kindest people you ever meet. They're so good in the jungle. But don't get me wrong. I mean, the area that we were going in and the expedition that we were doing, it wasn't like they just go and do that sort of thing. They hadn't been there either. It was an adventure for them too. And I think that's what I wanted to do, is I wanted to go in, take them on an expedition and adventure, because they're all explorers in their own right as well. Learn from them, but also for me, because they couldn't do something like this on their own either, because of the navigation required and the sort of large scale logistics required. So I also would share my skills with them. And why did I want to do it that way? I mean, it's completely immersive. You get a much more raw. It's not it's not them and me, which sometimes it might be if you're with a Western group of people with Amerindian team as well. That is just natural. I mean, it's human. It's something that humans do all the time without even thinking of it. But it was, we were a team. We all had our different strengths. We all had our different weaknesses, and we had to come together to make it happen. And I think every one of us felt that we were a forest family by the end of it. I love that when you go into these extreme environments, that it doesn't matter, male, woman, your race, it doesn't matter where you come from. And that's also great for them to go back as well, because women are seen quite differently in their cultures. So, I mean, maybe they might have a different look on when they return to their villages to see their women.
Yeah, I presume in their culture, is it common for women to be doing the kind of things you were doing there, to be trekking through the jungle?
I mean, the women there, they are hardcore. They're strong. I think my team might not give them as much credit as they deserve, because they do a lot of the hard work. But no, they wouldn't frequently be going off on, I don't know, hunting trips or doing long distance things at all. But I think that's changing. We're trying to change that when we go back, and trying to sort of encourage more female Amerindians to become and learn how to guide and help out with film shoots and TV shoots in the country as well, because I think it's needed, and it helps with the community.
I think that's a real beauty of being there solo, is that, as you said, you're able to really get embedded within that culture, within that team, and it wasn't like the kind of white man came, as so many of these trips where it's very much like you say, them and us. You were that forest family, and that's a really amazing team dynamic to have created.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very clear that sometimes you might see pictures of me with me and them, and we're all sort of a team, and you might say, "Oh, what's she doing there?" I look like the outsider, and I hate the word, but the colonialism that springs to mind. It's like, no, we're trying to abominate that. Like, it's nothing like that. They don't see it like that. I don't see it like that. And it just wasn't. You just need to look at the footage and hear how we talk about each other to understand that. And I think what makes it special as well is because they were experiencing this for the first time. It wasn't like I was going to their village and then learning how they do things, and they were in their home. They were scared, they were worried, they were uncertain about what was going on, looking to me to make decisions, looking at me where we were going to go. And I think that helps with the whole dynamic, that we were all experiencing something and having this adventure together.
I love that it was a truly shared endeavour, and that you learned, that two-way street of learning from each other. But presumably they had lots of knowledge of that part of the world. What kind of local knowledge did they bring to the table that really helped you with this trip?
Oh, I could talk all day about what they would tell you. I mean, you try and I would say, like, okay, can you tell me everything you can? And they'll just walk past and they'll pick something off a bark. Well, why did you pick that? And then they'll tell you, I'll pick this because if you get bitten by a snake today, this might buy you a few hours. Or why are you taking that bit of sap? It's like, oh, well, we take this because we scare off evil spirits. And it takes you a long time to get this out of them sometimes, because it's so normal for them. So I have to constantly be like, well, tell me this, tell me that. And it's fascinating. It really is. And I hope that their communities are going through quite a big change at the moment, a huge change actually. And I hope that they're able to keep that, because it's almost like some of the villages that they're in, it's uncool to learn all this stuff. The kids coming up, phones are starting to be introduced, even though they're living in the forest. The government have provided Wi-Fi, which is fantastic, so much knowledge you can get from that. But it's quite odd to look over at a village with straw huts and things in the middle of the jungle, and then there's a kid sitting in a hammock with his legs hanging out, but he's got a phone, and he's hiked over with arched back, just in focused and concentrating on his phone so much. It's quite an odd two worlds meeting.
Yeah, quite. Now, your trip didn't get off to the strongest start, did it? Tell me what happened when you first got dropped off by boat on day one of the trek.
Yeah, so it took quite a few days to even get to our start point. It was very remote. We were going down the Essequibo River in a long aluminium boat that lots of dents all over it. It's definitely had some wear and tear, but these things are not meant to capsize. They just don't capsize normally. And we approached some rapids. The Essequibo is notorious. It's the mighty Essequibo. It's got a lot of rapids. We approached them. The boat went up, and we had a ridiculously small engine. I think it was 15 horsepower, which is just not big enough for what we were doing. And we went up, and only half the boat cleared the rapids. We had whirlpools on one side, whitewater crashing, and we were stuck there with the other half. We were gradually edging back towards this whirlpool. There was a huge rock that was taking all the suction in as well. And after a few minutes, we were trying to get the engine to move and paddling and all of this, and then we just sort of got, the current got us, and we got flipped, we got catapulted out. We got thrown into the water, tumbling down the water, trying to cling to our bags. Thankfully, we dry bag things up just at the right moment. And we went under for a couple of minutes down to the rapids, and we all popped out the other side. Miracle, no one was seriously injured. It was quite a shock for some of the team. And it was somehow we managed to get all of the important, vital kit, because, if we'd lost any one of those bags, that would have been really a sensible decision, would have been to just stop the expedition, because everything has a purpose. And somehow we got through, and it was a big reminder that we're at the mercy of this jungle. We're in the wild now. Don't mess around. And I think that was a theme of every time you get a bit comfortable, a bit relaxed, you just get reminded, no, you cannot relax here. It's just you don't have that luxury.
Yeah, nature can always teach you a lesson, can't she? And I presume after that you were a state of high vigilance, ready for literally anything that could happen. Did you have any other mishaps or dramas during the course of the 50 days?
Oh yeah, I mean, every single day we had surprises, we had daily challenges. It really did feel like that. It's like, okay, well, let's see what today brings. And you just had to have that attitude of that optimistic sort of, well, let's just take what's thrown at us. And we had, I won't go into too much detail, but we had everything from quite a lot of close calls with some big venomous snakes, bushmaster snakes, really close calls, which Amerindians are especially, quite rightly so, I am as well, feared of these bushmasters, and they were a lot of them there, honestly. I'm not exaggerating. Thousands of them where we were going through, which is sort of unheard of when you talk to scientists and things. So we had close encounters with them, peccary, which are wild boar. Again, it's quite rare to come across huge packs of 500 of these pigs, but they're especially aggressive, and we were coming across these herds regularly, and you have to climb a tree to get away from them. So we had a fair share of challenges.
And you had one incident where one of your Amerindian teammates was pierced with a bamboo shaft while making a raft. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, poor Vivian. Vivian had some unlucky moments. He had some pretty close calls with the bushmaster snakes as well. We got to our first resupply point, so we had 2 resupplies in the whole 50 days. It was only 2 places this could happen. It was at the major rivers, which were basically barrels that were dropped off at coordinates. And so we reached these, and we had to cross this major river, Rira River. There was a lot of caiman involved in that river. It was too dangerous to cross. So we decided, well, we were surrounded by bamboo. Let's build a bamboo raft, and it will be a great fun. We can even go downstream a little bit and go in at a different point than we planned, so we can give our feet a rest for a day. And yeah, we cut all the bamboo, cutting on the last one that we needed, because we'd figured out how many we need and stuff. Vivian cut it. It landed. He put his arm up, landed on his forearm. And bamboo, for those who don't know, bamboo has these awful spikes. There is really sort of lethal stuff. These spikes that come out at the joints, and it was a tiny, tiny little thing. It penetrated his arm. It looked like a splinter. It was really small. And you think, well, we can try and pick it out. We got a needle and disinfected stuff and tried to get it. We just couldn't get it. And he was complaining because he couldn't move his little finger, and it was starting to affect the nerves. And it was on his right arm. Right arm is what you need to cut through the jungle. He machete arm, so he couldn't hold a machete. And also, after I was able to get on the sat phone then, because we were out of the canopy, so we were actually by the river. Thankful, because we were able to get the signal, and I talked to some doctors, and they sort of advised you need to get him out there because it's infection and nerve damage, and I mean, this is his livelihood in order to use his arms, so we couldn't risk anything. So yeah, we medevaced him. It, again, happened at the best place, happened at a river. We'd only recently had these barrels dropped off, so the boat I knew could come quicker than it would have, in any other place. So we got him out pronto.
Yes, it sounds like he had a nasty ulnar nerve injury. Yeah, and how did you actually action that medevac? Presumably you couldn't use a sat phone with a dense canopy. How were you able to call for help?
Well, again, luckily, because it was at the river, the sat phone under the canopy, just as much as I tried, it just doesn't work. You can try and cut trees down, but it's really, really unfortunately unreliable. And I think you would have to put it on a fishing wire and bow and arrow it up a tree and then pull it up together. That was our game plan.
I'd like to see that.
Oh, you need to see these guys with the bows and arrows. So I was actually able to get signal to Anders, who was operation manager, and Zansen, and he was in the boat with having just dropped off the barrels, so he was only a few hours away. So we got him. Vivian went with him in the boat. It took him a couple of days to actually get to civilization. And meanwhile, we also needed another team member because of all our kit. So Anders had to go around the villages while we waited with our raft. He went around the villages quite miles and miles away saying, do you want to come on this expedition? Do you want to do this? And thankfully he found Carlos. Carlos just asked his wife if he could go, and off he came. And then we had another fifth team member. So.
I imagine you had a lot of kit. So you had 2 resupplies during the 50 days. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you were carrying loads of around 35 kilograms on your back through really technical terrain with kind of gnarled and twisted tree roots and slippery forest floors, and all that deadly snakes and wild boars and pumas and things around. What toll did that take on your body over that 50 days?
Yeah, it was a huge strain, and something you have to get used to very quickly. I mean, people describe the expedition as a trek, and I say, well, actually, it was anything but trekking. If we'd trekked, that would have been a lovely experience. But this was crawling, this was climbing, this was hopping on one leg, it was wading through a lot of water, as you can imagine. Your first few weeks, everyone has to get used to it. It's a lot of weight on your back to carry. It's a lot of twisting. And I think one of the biggest things I would always worry about daily is because you're dealing with that weight and you're dealing with the uneven ground, but also you're constantly putting your feet on dead branches or dead leaves, and you don't know where the holes are. You don't know if your foot's going to just fall through. So I was always worried about people can twist their leg or break their leg or ankles. It's such a common that could end the expedition, just little things like that. But the body, it got used to it by the end, but I think we're going to talk about it later, but the wetness, you never get used to being wet all the time.
That's definitely something we should touch on is the art of self-care in the jungle. I'd be really interested to know how you managed your wet and dry kit, how you looked after your feet, just the general wetness of everything, things just rotting. And what are your top tips for other people listening that spend time in the jungle on how you stayed healthy in that environment, very, very hostile environment, over such a long period of time?
Yeah, and it's especially hostile and hard when you're doing what we were doing, where you're not by the rivers, so you don't have any sunlight, and also moving every single day where you don't have time to even try and wring out your clothes. It does make it hard. So the routine is absolute paramount. And what would we do? Well, we also, of course, we always have a wet and dry routine. So you take 2 pairs of clothes, and you have your wet clothes that is wet from either rain, river, sweat, all of the above. When you get to camp, and that can be anywhere, you always try and choose somewhere with a water source. Where we were, there's not always a creek. It's not always beautiful, idyllic water. It might just be stagnant water at times, but you have to try, and you can't go 1 or 2 nights without fresh water, because every night you wash your clothes that you've been wearing all day, use sort of special soap, wring it out. It's never going to dry overnight, but you try and get the bacteria out. You really scrub your skin. I use a bit of soap with a net bag, and if you have a net bag, like something sunglasses come in or something like that, and you really you scrub as hard as you can your back. Your back gets a lot of ticks, tiny ones that are hard to get off unless you really scrub, and they can obviously get infected. So you spend a lot of time washing, and then you get into your dry clothes. Also, top tip, never ever, if you're going into the deep jungle and moving through it and not by rivers, never take a towel. It's so pointless because it'll never dry, and it's just a soaking heavy thing in your bag. So yeah, you get into your dry clothes and you sort of try and wait by the fire to see if your skin dries out, but it's a humid place that you're rarely super dry. With the feet, the feet are the most important things. So powder every night, powder every morning. Sometimes it feels like you're onto a losing battle because you're in the morning you're paying such great attention to powdering your feet, putting this powder in your wet soggy socks, and you think, okay, it's going to be okay today. And then as soon as you start, you into the water, into the creek. But you have to you can't not. Every little thing you've got to be so disciplined with doing. It all makes such a difference. And checking your skin, I think, top tip, when you always have to get in your hammock quite early. It gets dark very early. You need to be off the ground, away from the creatures because you can't see. And just using your head torch to just study your skin is really, really important. You're looking for leeches, you're looking for ticks, you're looking for any infections that you need to keep an eye on. Use your teammates. I would use my teammates to look at my back, and I'd look at their back and then start pulling off ticks here, there, and everywhere. So it's really just keeping that routine and having a routine, and never, even if you think it's pointless sometimes, just stick with it.
So it takes a lot of self-discipline to look after yourself. What were your feet like at the end of all of this? Just being wet and dry all the time, or maybe mostly wet? Were they in reasonable condition?
The body is amazing at adapting. That's one thing I have learned from expeditions. The first 3 weeks we were all suffering. I think I had some nerve damage from my feet. We all do, from just being wet all the time, just a bit numb. It's starting to gradually come back. But for me, that's also years of being very cold in Arctic and mountain environments as well. But yeah, I do honestly think that the body after a certain time can, as long as you haven't got infections, because nothing will heal there, that your body can get tougher.
Let's talk a little about jungle campcraft. Now, you're a big fan of the Hennessy hammock, as am I. They're amazing bits of kit. How did you set up your camp? What were the kind of key things that made your camp successful each night?
Yeah, so once we found a water source, we know it's a routine of 5. We look at the trees, figure out the most important thing for us was to make sure we could all be close together, because if you do become, in these really, really remote jungle environments, you do become vulnerable if you're out on a limb. for your team. So privacy isn't a thing. I made it very clear that we were all going to be very close together. So we all make sure that we can be close. We'll share trees a lot of the time. Then we start sweeping. We start sweeping the ground with our machetes, clearing debris, clearing as many dead leaves as we can. That's, of course, so that you can see what's on the ground. Scorpions, bullet ants, making sure there's no ant nests or termites or things like that might come and give you a nasty sting or ruin your camp. And once you've done that, you set up your hammock, put up your tarps. We have some big tarps, which is really handy because of the torrential rain. You need some good shelter. And what is important? I mean, drying or hanging things. Nothing dries, but you get this sense of homeliness, don't you? When you've got all your tarps up and you've got washing lines out, you've got your pots and pans, and it does create this. Oh, okay, we're here. We can settle for a few hours tonight. It's a nice feeling.
Great feeling. It's a great feeling. One thing I've always struggled with is lighting fires in the jungle because everything's so wet. How did you manage that? Did you bring your own fire lighting equipment?
Yeah, actually, it's not too bad in the jungle because everything is wet, yes, but you look for standing dry wood or dead wood. So you spot trees, and I mean, there's enough trees in the jungle that there's somewhere there's a dead tree, and then you look at the dead tree, you take off the bark on the outside, inside it's so dry. And so you never, the key with lighting a fire in the jungle is you never take anything from the ground, because then the ground is just saturated with water. You always take it from things that are still standing. Once you've done that, I mean, the ground was wet enough that we could light a fire straight onto the wet leaves. Obviously, if it's been dry for weeks, you'll be able to tell you have to raise it, otherwise you risk burning the forest down. But you make a call. And the fires we took, we did a mixture of matches, which most of the time, some of the guys occasionally used a tiny bit of petrol that we had, just because why not? But we ran out of that. Yeah, it was just matches and then a fire lighter as well occasionally, a sort of sparker. I'm a big fan of the sparker because they work anywhere. Yeah,
brilliant. So you didn't have to resort to any kind of bow type bushcraft skills.
We did it for just to do it twice,
just for fun.
Camera.
Yeah,
just to film it.
Cool.
Just to do it. But it's when you're there, there's enough things to worry about when you've got. You can do it.
I mean, it looks cool, doesn't it? But I've tried it a few times. It's so time consuming and difficult, and it requires like Herculean levels of patience, especially after you've been trekking all day and you're
exactly.
knackered.
And all you want to do is go and all you want to do when you get to camp is have your food, then go and dry your skin out in your hammock. And there's this urgency to just sort of sit there with your body just open in your hammock. Just, please dry. So the less time you can do it takes to light a fire there, considering you're lighting them twice a day, is a good thing. Yeah.
Last time I was in my Hennessy hammock in jungle in Costa Rica, I hadn't used it for a few years, and I'd done all that stuff. We'd lit a fire, had some nice dinner and stuff, and it was like, let's get into bed. It'll be all lovely and dry, get my dry kit and get all cozy. And I went in there and I'd forgotten that the tarp was so old and knackered. I hadn't replenished the DWR coating. So I looked inside my hammock, and it was torrential rain, and it was raining inside the hammock, and it was just one of the bleakest moments.
That is bleak.
It was a real learning point for me. You've got to look up and check your kit, and not just assume, even though you've been using it for years, that it's still fit for purpose, and all this stuff needs maintenance and repair. And I was just very, very casual, and I paid the price.
Definitely. I mean, it's all things like that, isn't it? We were talking about the top tips when you arrive to camp. One of my team, Mikey, he really, for some reason, really wanted to wash later in the evening all the time. Everyone else, we'd get to camp, set up a hammock, and then go and have a wash, get out of those clothes and the bacterial clothes as quickly as possible. But for some reason, he used to like going later, and he was the only person that got mosquito worm. So the larvae in your skin that grow, and
nasty.
Got 5 of them. None of us got any of them, and I think that was because he was staying in his manky clothes for longer, it had time to go in. So cleaning such a big factor.
Yes. Just like your mother told you, wash behind your ears. But it's beyond that in the jungle, isn't it? It's not just a matter of hygiene; it's a matter of survival, isn't it?
Yeah, and
self-care is so important.
Yeah, looking in between your fingertips, in between your fingers for ticks. They like that. They really like those little places.
So tell me about jungle navigation, Lucy. This is a particular unique challenge of being in underneath the canopy. You've got dense canopy. It's really hard to get your bearings. There's very few landmarks or viewpoints. There's very limited maps of where you are. How did you manage to work out where your position and your bearing when you were doing this trip?
Yeah, it was always going to be a challenge. Even when I was looking at the maps before leaving, I couldn't plan a route. I knew where I was starting. I knew where we were going to have resupply points, but I couldn't say this is the best route to go to until we actually got there, because you also don't know how long it's going to take you each day. So what I do every night before the next day, is I'd look at the maps. I would try and guess where a water source might be. Maps didn't always have them on there, but from experience, you think, well, I think there might be water here. And then you put a few different options, because then you don't know how thick the vegetation is going to be. So you've got to have escape points, right? We might be here. But okay, if it's this point at 12 noon, then we're going to have to go this option. And so you plan that out in your head. But then in the day, I just work off a compass and bearing. So I have a GPS, I have an InReach, but in terms of giving you the map, it doesn't have a map on there. It just can give you the coordinates, which is great in the evening and just before you're about to start, and making sure you kind of have an idea of where you are. But again, sometimes didn't correlate to the maps because they were unreliable. So you had to make sure you weren't just thinking that was correct every time. And navigation in the jungle. It's so hard. I spent all my time just staring at my compass. So I would go third all the time. I'm head of nav. You have two lead cutters, two of the team that we rotate. And I say, okay, the bearing is this. We're going to go in that direction. And they'll start cutting. But humans cannot walk in a straight line as hard as we try. We seem to always go left because of our right leg is always dominant. And you look on the map and you just gradually go left, just tiny points. And the guys will think they're going straight. But I have to stare at that bearing and say, no, go right a bit more. And you try and correct it as well, because you have obstacles that you can't go through, whether it's a denser part of forest or a fallen down tree. And you'll go, okay, well, I'm going to go left and I'm going to straighten up. But again, I might have to change the bearing again. Depending on that. And there are no points, there are no viewpoints, and you just have to hope that you just stare at that little arrow and adjust it when you need to.
Did you get lost?
Didn't get lost, but we would go off track if you're not paying attention. It's every minute or so I have to give a direction, which is crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting. That is a well-described thing, actually, how people, when they're walking, do naturally deviate to one side. If I'm walking with someone on my right, I'm always walking into them. I'm not really concentrating on talking. I can only really do one thing at a time. Sorry, I'm talking but not concentrating on walking. So I'll walk into them constantly and they're just, come on, man, what are you doing? Apparently, what you can do is you can go into a field, like a sports track or something, and you can just blindfold yourself and walk just in what you think is a straight line, and then you can measure the degrees of natural deviation that and that is apparently it's quite a consistent thing, just so you know for the future.
That's interesting.
You can factor that into your compass bearing.
That is really fascinating. Yeah, because as soon as you add in trees and climbing over branches and vines and crawling and things, then it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a whole different level. So we've talked about self-care, we've talked about jungle camp, we've talked about navigation, about medevac, all these challenges of being in the jungle. One thing I'm interested in is when this was all over and you'd achieved it. It must have been an incredible feeling it's a world first, essentially what you've achieved there. Is how you transition from living in that environment and with your forest family back to regular life in North London. This is a lot of expeditioners struggle about this kind of reverse culture shock, that transition back to your kind of usual life. What was that like? I mean, it's not the first time you've done this, but what were the challenges on this occasion, and what techniques could you share with our audience that might help them make that transition?
Yeah, I mean, when the first time this happened over 10 years ago, it was a huge shock to the system. No one warned me about it. It hit me hard. And since then, like you said, I've done it a lot of times. I kind of know what to expect. I know that I'm never going to have that same experience again. I can definitely have other just as good experiences, but what I've just been through is done. It's the end of an era. And for me, coming back on this one is actually a bit of a whirlwind because of the media reception and the interviews. I was suddenly having to talk about this expedition that I hadn't even had time to digest yet. So I just picked a few stories that, because you can't even remember everything when you just come back. You're so involved with just finalizing it, and I've forgotten all the stories. So I picked a few stories that I could just regurgitate. Because I knew I was going to have to go back and writing books and things and think about it deeply. And so I just found myself in just talking about it constantly. But I think for my team, the end of the expedition, the forest ran out. We reached the savannah, and that was the end of the expedition. We came out into the heat of the savannah. Suddenly my communication device had cell reception. I think it was clear that my parents had been tracking my every move, even though I couldn't get messages from them. Got out in the bright blue sky and just get a message from my parents saying what a relief. And it was definitely a relief. But for my team, they were nervous. I think a lot of people get this feeling of nervous to go back to not mundane life, but not that same achievement every single day. And it's hard. And they were worried about leaving and people not understanding what they've been through because they've changed as people. And I think the tips that I tell people, I tell tell people when I guide them in the Arctic, is that what you've been through, even though it's ending, it doesn't have to, you can keep on to this person is still that person. You can go back and think about what you've achieved and use that energy to go and thrive in everyday life, but be warned that you've changed so much. Other life haven't. So be expecting that, because I think you always expect when you've changed so much and had so many experiences that everyone else will, and that everyone will care. People might not care what you've done, but that does not matter. You can be proud of yourself. And I think most important thing in life for me and to go and do things is to be proud of your past self. I think it's very, very special if you're going through tough times and you can think, well, I've got through that in the past and go through that. So just use that energy that you've learned and on to the next thing.
Yeah, that idea of using that energy to thrive in everyday life, but not necessarily expecting everyone to really have changed in the way that you have. And I these kind of experiments, the whole raison d'etre, isn't it? It's why we go into extreme environments, is so that we can grow and transform as people. I think that the world is out there, isn't it? And you can't do that from your kitchen table, can you?
Absolutely. And there's this beautiful point. I think it lasts about 2 weeks when you've just finished a big challenge, big personal challenge, whatever it might be. And there's 2 weeks where you are totally in the present when you talk to people. You radiate this energy, and it's other people will get it off you, and they'll feel just as energized just by talking to you. And it lasts about 2 weeks. After that, you get sucked into normal life. I mean, the phones, you start looking at your phone too much, and you're distracted, and you're not so much engaged. But those magical 2 weeks, I say, when you get back from doing something like this, put all the everything you've ever wanted, put it out in the ether, have those conversations, have those meetings, because it's the best time to do it.
So the final thing I'd just like to ask you, Lucy, before we draw things to a close, is around your role models, because and we spoke about this before we started recording, is a real lack of female role models in the adventure space. I mean, your role models were people like Ben Fogle and Bear Grylls, but they're very few women in that space in a kind of a high profile way. So tell me about your thoughts on that, and do you think that might be changing?
definitely changing. It's much needed for sure. But yeah, we're seeing more women have been getting into adventure and getting more media coverage over the last recent years. I think it needs to happen because, I mean, yes, I was inspired by male adventurers, male explorers, but I think I was really inspired by what they were doing, and I was able to look past. I was lucky enough in, my best friend was a boy. I very much felt myself as sort of I'm a male explorer or something. I look past that, but for so many people, it doesn't even enter their mind that it might be possible. He's a man, he's a military man. I'm not. I don't want to join the military, and it's probably out of reach for me. But if you just present that opportunity and present that we can redefine what it means to be an explorer, you don't have to look a certain way. We all have our different strengths, we all have our different weaknesses, and we can all, as individuals, thrive in these environments. I think it's really good to show kids, especially, that opportunity is out there.
Or provide some balance, I think, especially on social media, to all young girls who are just presented with lots of makeup tutorials and their role models often kind of pop stars and that kind of thing. So it's nice to show them that you can be outdoorsy and strong and adventurous. So well done. That's
and that you can have both. It doesn't have to be either or. Nothing needs to be one or the other. You can do everything.
Yeah.
I love to go to do school talks and turn up quite glammed up, because I'll often have little boys say, "You don't look like an explorer," and it's like, that's the point. Because then the little girl there might think, "Oh, well, maybe I don't have to choose because I enjoy both." So yeah, it's you never have to. It's never black and white.
Yeah, quite. Now, Lucy, we've got the pleasure of meeting you face to face at this year's World Extreme Medicine Conference in November. Can you give us a little sneak preview of what you'll be talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to be going into quite some in depth of the different sort of milestones of my getting to where I am now, the different expeditions and different moments that really were poignant to me. Also, the things that I think most important qualities to have in order to achieve big goals, whatever they might be, that I've learned that I always go back to, and I've decided they are the most valuable things that as people we can do in order to take on our ambitions head on.
Well, looking forward to seeing you in November at the conference in Edinburgh, Lucy. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. And if you're listening, I hope you can join us there as well. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.